Good afternoon. My name is Ed Bernard, and I serve as the chair of the Financial Accounting Foundation. I'd like to welcome our stakeholders tuning in into this virtual meeting. Today's meeting will include reports from the FASB Chair, the GASB Chair, and the FAF Executive Director. We'll also receive a report about the latest activities of the Financial Accounting Standards Advisory Council, as well as a report from the Trustees Standard Setting Process Oversight Committee. Before we get to those reports, I'd like to acknowledge Hillary Salo in her new role as a board member of the FASB. As many will know, Hillary most recently served as the technical director of the FASB and chair of the Emerging Issues Task Force. As technical director, she was responsible for managing the FASB standard setting activities and staff. Hillary joined the FASB in 2020 after spending over 15 years at KPMG, first in Chicago and then New York, where she served as a partner in the audit practice. In addition to a distinguished career at KPMG, Hillary served as a professional accounting fellow in the office of the chief accountant of the SEC, and early in her career at the FASB as a postgraduate technical assistant. We welcome Hillary in this new role and are pleased to work with her in this new capacity. So with that, let's move to our regular agenda. And the first item of business is to approve the minutes from the board's May 22nd meeting. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Okay, thanks. With that, we'll move to the reports from the FASB, FASAC, and GASB. So I'll turn it over to FASB Chair Rich Jones.
Sorry, I'm here, Ed. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. Please find a copy of the second quarter chair report in your materials. I did want to spend a few minutes to update you on our recent activity in what was a very busy quarter here at the FASB. But first, I wanted to officially welcome Jackson Day in his 44th day on the job. Jack has certainly hit the ground running, and I'd also like to echo Ed's comments regarding Hillary Salo. We're a great addition to our board, and we look forward to working with Hillary during her term here. During the second quarter, the FASB voted to move forward with final standards in two priority areas. They were our disaggregation income statement expenses project and our project on induced conversions of convertible debt, which originated with our Emerging Issues Task Force. The completion of and progress on both of these projects are major accomplishments made possible by the efforts of our board, our staff, and most importantly, our stakeholders. The board also voted to move forward and issue 7 exposure drafts. Those exposure drafts include projects on accounting for software costs, accounting for environmental credit programs, accounting for government grants, share-based consideration payable to a customer, derivative scope refinements, and hedge accounting, as well as a project to clarify interim disclosure requirements. We've carefully considered the timing of release of these projects, their scope and comment periods, so that our stakeholders can provide the input we need to create high-quality accounting standards. Moving forward on all these projects demonstrates the significant progress we've made on the projects our stakeholders identified as most important to them, and the important input we received as part of our prior agenda outreach project. All of the projects on our agenda, including the many I just summarized, are in accordance with our mission to establish and improve standards of financial accounting and reporting and align with our charge in the Foundation's bylaws that both direct and restrict the FASB to work on the establishment and improvement of financial accounting and reporting standards. Said another way, we do one thing and one thing only: financial accounting and reporting standards. The progress we've made on our entire agenda positions us to initiate our agenda outreach project here in the third quarter to better understand our stakeholders' perspectives on what should be the FASB's priorities going forward. We look forward to that input. On behalf of my colleagues on the board, I'd like to thank the trustees for your continued support as we work to fulfill our mission, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Any questions? And since we're on 2 screens, oh, there we go. I just saw
Tim.
It's him and then Manju.
Thanks, Ed, and Rich, thanks. And hey, congratulations on the way you're moving through the agenda. It's really impressive, both the speed of activity and the responsiveness to the input we've had. And the question I had for you, Rich, as you start looking at developing your next agenda, we noticed through the reporting that we really have not received any suggestions from stakeholders so far this year, which I think is out of the norm, where we in the past have gotten a fair amount of input. And, what do you think that means as it relates to do you think we're satisfying most of the requests that are out there, or do you, what are your thoughts on that, if any?
Well, Tim, a couple things. One, I do hope we're satisfying the requests that are out there, and I would encourage all of our stakeholders to reach out to us, whether it's formally or informally at any time, with any requests for us to look into projects from a standard setting perspective. But maybe going back in 21, when we did our agenda outreach, the way we developed that was we met with over 200 stakeholders and just asked them, what should we be working on? We took the results of that, put it in a document, and issued it for public comment, and we got over 500 responses to that. And there were 36 items that came out of that our stakeholders generally said we should be taking a look at and working on. And we brought those all back to our board. So if you think about it, we pulled forward likely what were many agenda requests that would have come in through other processes by pulling them forward. I'd also focus on the fact that we do have 6 advisory groups. And our advisory group meetings, which are available and they're broadcast, are generally a dialogue asking those stakeholders, what should we be working on? What are the projects that FASB should be focusing on? So often we get projects and ideas to look at things through those advisory groups. We also have 3 ongoing post-implementation reviews going on leasing, revenue recognition, and CECL. And to the extent that we're hearing input from stakeholders, those are things we're bringing to our board and asking our board, should we be focusing on? So I'd hope that this temporary lull in formal agenda requests is really because we've made so many other avenues available in the outreach, and pulling in our stakeholders to our process has made it so that there are other avenues that may even be easier for them to suggest items to us. I'd also point out we have our newly reconstituted EITF that's been up and running for a couple months. And already there have been 3 items that they've been discussing, one of which has already come to our board, 2 of which will be the subject of either future board or EITF meetings, also as suggested agenda items. So there are other avenues that things are coming through.
Rich, thanks for that. And I do think that, the structure and processes that you and the team have put into place really has enhanced our effectiveness at listening to stakeholders. And I think that's a big accomplishment, and I encourage you to continue. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tim.
Manju, I think you were next.
Thank you, Ed. Rich, I echo Trustee Kristen's comments about all the work that FASB's done in the past quarter. So congratulations on a very productive quarter where you put out 7 exposure drafts. So given that background, you also had some transition in very important roles in your organization. As of July 1, FASB has a new vice chair, Hillary Salo, and a new technical director, Jackson Day. Could you shed some additional light on how these transitions are going, and what do you expect going forward?
Sure, and great question, Manju. Fortunately, Hillary joining our board was about as seamless a transition as there could be, given her role with all of our projects in her prior role. So a change in responsibility, but she's well steeped in all of our projects and our outreach with stakeholders. And I can assure you she's well armed to fulfill that role, and has already done so. Jack Day, we were fortunately to attract Jack to this role with his broad experience, including a prior history with the FASB here. Jack has spent an awful lot of time meeting with not only all of our folks here internally, but with many of our stakeholders. And Jack has taken on an important role of shepherding through, for example, those 7 exposure drafts to completion and issuance in the subsequent period. So I would say it's gone very well. And while I'd love to take the credit for it, I think really Jack and Hillary deserve the credit for such a smooth transition.
Mm-hmm. They absolutely do. Thank you.
Any other questions for Rich? I'm flipping back and forth between 2 screens.
think I see
feel
Rick.
free to speak up.
I think I see Rick Reisig in my upper left corner. Ed.
Yep. Well, thanks, Ed, and thanks, Rich. You mentioned the finalization of the last chapter of the conceptual framework, and congratulations for that. As you've described to us, it's been an ongoing project, and it's nice to have it completed. But for many of us, the conceptual framework really is kind of a hidden thing. It's kind of out there, and we don't understand the importance of it. Could you relate to us just how important it is to you and the board, and how you utilize that?
Sure. And Rick, you're right. I think the conceptual framework, while it's near and dear to our hearts, we do spend a lot of time with stakeholders explaining what it is and what it's not. I often start with what it's not. It does not create authoritative gap. But what it does do is provide a very helpful framework to our board to consider as we're considering future standard setting. So that to the extent that we're considering standard setting in a new area, and we're considering our assets created, our liabilities created, we have a framework with which our staff and our board can consider as we make those decisions. It doesn't predetermine those decisions, but it's something useful, and it adds a discipline to our process. That's, to me, why it was very important that as we developed the conceptual framework, every chapter was issued in draft format. We got comments from our stakeholders so that we could understand their different perspectives on it. But so I think it's a great framework. I think it builds a discipline into our board process. But what I also want to assure our stakeholders is it doesn't predetermine outcomes. Those outcomes for authoritative standards that are only after issuance of documents, public exposure, and board deliberations in public, and ultimately a majority of our board deciding to amend authoritative gap.
Great, thanks. Any other questions for Rich? Seeing none, thank you, Rich, and we'll move on to the report from the FASAC Chair, Mike Morrow. Mike?
Thanks, Ed, and good day, everyone. My report can be found in tab 11 in your materials. The report includes activities for the second quarter. A report on first quarter activities was provided earlier this year. I'd like to highlight some of the activities for the first half of this year, as well as our plans for the upcoming meeting. Starting with the March FASAC meeting, held in person, included discussion on 2 topics. First topic was a broad one on options, practical expedience, and changes in accounting principles. Council members discussed the circumstances and factors the board should consider when determining to provide accounting alternatives in GAAP. Council members also provided input about guidance on changes in accounting principles. Overall, council members were supportive of the board's judicious consideration of accounting alternatives that better represent the underlying economics of a transaction or how management runs its business. Some council members suggested that the board develop a roadmap for determining when accounting alternatives should be permitted, increase the transparency about why an accounting alternative is provided in GAAP, clarify what constitutes a practical expedient, and consider eliminating or reducing the number of accounting alternatives when the financial reporting is not a better representation of the underlying economics. Investor council members indicated a preference for limiting accounting alternatives in GAAP to increase comparability, while recognizing that accounting alternatives may be warranted in certain circumstances. And they also suggested that the board consider disclosure that would require an entity to provide its reasons for making a specific accounting policy election and a tabular disclosure of its accounting policy elections. Preparer and practitioner members noted the benefits when entities within the industry consistently apply or do not apply certain practical expedients, and they were generally supportive of practical expedients that facilitate transition for the initial adoption of new accounting requirements. And they noted some inconsistency in practice in how entities apply the guidance on changes in accounting principles and assess whether changes in accounting principles are preferable. The second topic was an update on selected FASB projects. As you just heard, the board has a lot on its plate, so we got an update on recent progress on select projects, specifically disaggregation, income statement expenses, and accounting for environmental credits. As communicated in the Q1 quarterly report, after considering FASB's technical agenda and the anticipated timing of progress on those projects, we decided to extend the time for our in-person FASAC meeting on Thursday, September 19th, and to cancel the meeting that was scheduled for Tuesday, June 11th. This change was intended to better align FASAC's discussion timing with the FASB's agenda to ensure the most effective use of time. As part of our planning for discussion topics for future FASAC meetings, we've updated and included our longer-term outlook of potential topics for 24 and 25, which are in your material, and we welcome your input on these and any other topics you think FASAC should consider. At our upcoming FASAC meeting on Thursday, September 19th, we anticipate the key topics will be gap disclosure, effectiveness, and process. First, look at the agenda consultation process for the upcoming year and update and next steps on select projects. We also recently solicited nominations for FASAC vacancies for terms beginning in January 2025 through our open nomination process. While we requested nominations to be submitted by Friday, June 28th, if you have any additional candidates that you did not have a chance to share, we'd welcome any additional suggestions in the next week or so. I'm pleased to say we have a very robust pipeline, and we're in the early stages of whittling that down to some final candidates to share with you. So I'd be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Mike? Great. Seeing none, Mike, thanks very much for that report and for all the work that you and FASAC do. It really adds considerable value to the process. And with that, we'll turn to the GASB Chair's report. Joel Black. Joel?
Thanks, Ed. Great to see everybody. June 14th marked the 40th anniversary of the first meeting of the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. Since that day, our board and staff have worked tirelessly to develop and maintain high-quality accounting and financial reporting standards for state and local governments throughout the country. In July, we had a very nice event celebrating that 40th anniversary and thanked all of our board members and team members, past and present, as well as the current GASAC members. In April, we issued Statement 103, which is the culmination of our financial reporting model project. While we did take governmental funds out of the scope of that project, as we've talked about with you in the past, the board believes that there are significant improvements in what is in Statement 103, in particular improvements to management's discussion and analysis and the proprietary fund income statement. In the Oversight Committee meeting yesterday, we discussed the 3 rounds of due process we had on this project and provided details on our interactions with over 1,100 stakeholders as we worked our way through that process, which doesn't count the hundreds, if not thousands, of GASB updates and liaison or stakeholder outreach meetings in which this project was discussed over the last decade. Additionally, in the second quarter, we released the post-implementation review reports on the 2 pension standards after reporting on that review to you and the Oversight Committee at last quarter's trustee meeting. So that report is available for everybody and out on our website. As we continue to monitor the Financial Data Transparency Act, we do note that the SEC issued a week ago their portion of the joint rulemaking that has been expected. We continue to monitor and analyze that rulemaking and engage with the SEC, and we continue to work on our financial statement taxonomy. Like the FASB, we have a number of due process documents maybe coming out soon, whereas they maybe have some final ones, but I think the next quarter or 2 are going to be pretty busy as we get those due process documents out and then encourage commentary from our stakeholders. With that, Ed, that concludes my report, which is included in your materials, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Miriam, I see your hand up first.
Thank you, Ed. Joel, as you're aware, the shortage of accountants and other financial resources that are available to state and local governments continue to be an issue for that sector. What does GASB think about that issue, and what can GASB do to assist?
Sure, Marion, it continues to be the #1 thing that our stakeholders talk about anytime that I interact with them. I think we are very conscious of that and doing a number of things. The first of which is our agenda is smaller. The board has set a very high bar for us to undertake a project because we know that when we change or amend or add to gap, we're asking those stakeholders to spend their time and valuable resources on something they otherwise wouldn't have to do. And so for us to undertake a project, we have established a really high bar that it needs to have the potential to result in a significant improvement to the financial report. We have several projects we think met that bar, and we're working on them, but it is an agenda that is at least half the size that it was, say, 4 years ago. Another couple of other things, Rich talked about the conceptual framework. We issued concept statement 7 related to note disclosures 2 years ago. We continue to utilize that better description of essentiality for us to require something to be a note disclosure in our current projects. But maybe even more importantly, we have a plan to take all existing note disclosures through that new lens of essentiality and evaluate them. And if some of them don't reach that high bar, then the board can consider whether to undertake a project to take away some of those disclosure requirements. Finally, I'd say our post-implementation review, which you all are very familiar with, we just talked about with pensions, is being used to evaluate recently issued major standards to make sure that they're meeting their objectives and that the cost benefit works on them. So we are very conscious of how our requirements impact stakeholders and their use of resources, and we're trying to minimize that as much as we can while still achieving our mission.
Thank you, Joel. I'm sure the stakeholders appreciate the assistance.
Yeah, thank you for that. Manju, I think you have your hand up.
Thank you. Hey, Joel, you talked about the 40th anniversary of GASB, and that was a very nice reception for stakeholders and for current members and former members. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think I am putting you on the spot here. So as you look forward to the rest of your term as chair of GASB and beyond, where do you hope the GASB will be or should be at its 50th anniversary?
Manju, I think that what I hope that we continue to do while I remain here and beyond is evolve and make sure we understand how financial reporting for governments is changing, in particular, how technology is impacting and changing that process. We've done a lot of work recently on how users are ingesting information and using technology. That has resulted in our taxonomy work that we're doing. I think the next shift, and not shift in focus, but additional focus, should be on how technology is or could be changing how preparation of financial reports is done by state and local governments. So while we won't be developing software, right, what can we do to encourage software vendors to focus in our sector and make financial reporting more efficient and affordable for our governments, as well as figure out, are there things we can do to more easily facilitate that preparation and that advancement of technology. So I think that's going to be something that is going to impact our organization for the next decade plus.
Thank you, Joel. I wholeheartedly agree that focus on technology and how that can be deployed to assist governmental entities, especially the smaller governmental entities, in their financial reporting efforts. So thank you.
Beth Pierce, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you. And Joel, first I want to follow up on what Manju said and commend you and your team for what you're doing and the look forward that you have, and what GASB will look like in the future. So thank you. My question actually relates to an issue that you've talked about many times in our quarterly meetings and with GASB and GASAC, which is the Federal Data Transparency Act. We obviously have a great deal of interest in that. As you know, the SEC recently issued a proposed rule to set joint standards for financial reporting by government entities. I know it's just out recently, but do you have a preliminary thought? Have some preliminary thoughts about that and how it might interact with what we're doing?
I do, Beth. It has been out only a week, but our team has looked at it and I've read it. I think that it was what we expected it to be because it's the joint rulemaking. So all the agencies together issuing presumably the same rule. The SEC's proposal looks exactly like the FDIC's proposal, for example. They stayed pretty broad. And so I think the impact on us and what ultimately may come to the municipal securities environment from the SEC specifically when they do their more specific rulemaking, say 2 years from now, hasn't been impinged upon. I think so. I think that we haven't been impacted yet. That more future rulemaking will probably be much more impactful. I will highlight that there is some, I don't want to say controversy, but there was a surprise in the rule related to a financial securities, in our case, bond identifier that I think is going to have a lot of the municipal securities world in somewhat of a reactive phase and probably a commenting proposal, because QSIPs would no longer be utilized in the reporting to the MSRB, but that doesn't really impact us. But that's probably the biggest thing that came out of the joint rulemaking, Beth.
Thank you very much. The QSIP, again, it doesn't affect us directly, but I can assure you from my prior experience, that's a big issue.
To be sure. Thank you very much for that report, Joel. Any other questions for Joel? Seeing none, then we'll turn to the report of the Standard Setting Process Oversight Committee, and the co-chair, Manju, back to you.
Thank you, Ed. Good afternoon. The Standard Setting Process Oversight Committee met yesterday, Monday, August 12th. We received informational reports from FASB Chair Rich Jones and GASB Chair Joel Black. And as we do at each meeting, we discuss the FASB GASB board meetings that trustees have observed in the past quarter. Yesterday, we heard from Trustee Rick Reisig and FASB liaison to PCC Sue Cosper regarding their observations of the PCC meetings that took place on June 24th and 25th. And from myself and Trustees G and Pierce regarding our meeting observations of the GASB meetings on July 10th and 11th, and from Trustee Mike Rawlings regarding his meeting observations of the GASB meeting on July 31st. I also offered my meeting observations of the GASAC meetings on July 8th and 9th. The committee and its participants engaged in a valuable and productive discussion on several important topics. For many stakeholders interested in viewing a recording of yesterday's public session, you can find this on the FAF website. With regards to the report received from GASB Chair Joel Black and Director Alan Skelton reviewed the main highlights of the second quarter. Many of these matters have already been covered in GASB Chair Black's report during this session, so I'll be brief. I'll focus on some other topics discussed by the committee, included a summary of GASB's progress on all ongoing agenda projects, including the issuance of Statement 103, which is the financial reporting model, and its continuing monitoring activities, specifically those related to electronic financial reporting. A review of GASAC's work in the last quarter to identify its top priorities, and finally, a status update on the GASB's post-implementation reviews on its 4 pronouncements now that the pension EIR has been completed and issued. With regards to the report received from FASB Chair Rich Jones and Technical Director Jackson Day discussed the FASB's progress in the last quarter. Again, many of these matters have already been covered in FASB Chair Jones' report during this session. Other topics discussed by committee included a summary of progress made on the FASB's technical agenda, conceptual framework, and top priorities for investors, and an educational session on how the FASB manages the pressures of public policy on its standard setting work, which gave the committee an opportunity to learn more about the history of perspectives, the challenges, the recent activities, and the FASB's approach to these pressures. That was a very educational session for the committee and for the trustees. And with that, I will turn things back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Manju. Any quick questions for Manju? I know a number of us were at that meeting. So finally, a report from FAF Executive Director John Auchincloss. John?
Yeah, thank you, Ed, and good day to everyone listening. One of the most important things the FAF Board of Trustees does is to make appointments to our various bodies. And since our last meeting, the Appointments Committee of the Board of Trustees has continued its diligent work conducting several important searches. So one of those is a search for new trustees, as we have several departing FAF trustees whose terms will end on December 31st, 2024, namely trustees Bruce Herring, Mike Rawlings, Tim Ryan, Larry Salva, and Chundran Thomas. The Appointments Committee is also conducting a search for a GASB member to replace board member Brian Caputo, whose term will conclude on June 30th of next year, 2025, and a search for a PCC member to replace Paul Hensley, whose term concluded on June 19th of this year. We hope to be able to announce appointments for all of these searches before the end of this calendar year. As many of our listeners are aware, the FAF's 2023 annual report was published on May 29th, the theme of standards at work from Main Street to Wall Street. The report also commemorates the 40th anniversary of the creation of the GASB, which you've heard about from Joel Black and Manju Gannarawala. It highlights the major milestones over the last 40 years of the GASB board and the staff as they have worked to earn the responsibility entrusted to them. Our annual report is available as a printable PDF file and as an enhanced digital version on our website. I'd also like to remind our listeners that the annual report includes an update to our stakeholders on the FAF strategic plan, which was approved by our trustees in November of 2022. We continue to make progress on our objectives and will continue to share this information with stakeholders on an annual basis. Last but not least, I'd like to note that as of July 1st, the Foundation's office in Washington, D.C. has moved to the Metropolitan Square building in that city, which is adjacent to the old Ebbett Grill for those of you who know Washington, and is therefore quite centrally located. The new offices have the ability to host visitors from our Norwalk headquarters and to facilitate meetings with stakeholders. So we're very pleased that that has happened smoothly and we're installed in our new offices. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions and turn things back over to you, Ed.
Okay, great. Thanks, John. Thanks for that report. Any questions for John? Great. Seeing none. This is the end of the public session of today's FAF Board of Trustees meeting. Thanks again to those of you who tuned into this webcast. Let me remind everyone that the next FAF Board of Trustees meeting will be held on Tuesday, November 19th in Norwalk, Connecticut. Thanks to all of you and have a great day.